Good evening, everybody. This is not my normal lifetime at all, but I wanted to make a video this week on this topic because not only is it pertinent to life in general, like your social life, your emotional health, spiritual health, and all that, but it's also pertinent to health and fitness. So I'm going to wait a second and wait for everybody to get in and make sure that um, everything's plugged in correctly. And then I'm going to share this out with the class and let everyone know that I am live. Yay. No. Sir. I don't like when it's buffering. I don't like that. It's like, I can't do anything about it. All right, so let me make sure people see. No. Okay, let me see if I can do this the right way. Copy link. All right, we're gonna put this on the social medias. Let's see, did I get this right? And then we're gonna get started with the topic today. And I don't have a lot of time because I have to make a phone call. Okay. Let's make sure it's posted. Cool. So the reason why I'm talking about this is because oftentimes when I start to work with clients on their self-esteem and their confidence, there is this fear, and I would call it irrational, but I meet my clients where they're at. So there's this fear that they will become arrogant or get a big ego because they are all of a sudden taking care of themselves and having boundaries for themselves and standards for the way that they behave and standards for the way that they eat and the way they interact with people. And so this is actually, it's a topic that unfortunately is has a subtle chokehold on a lot of people as it relates to health and fitness. And so I'm going to talk about this in a general sense. The title of today's video is Ego versus Self-Esteem, Confidence versus Arrogance. And I want to talk about those things distinctly and what I'm going to go through the Webster's definition, but also what society deems as someone's ego and the difference between the things and how you can build your self-esteem and build your confidence without being arrogant. Because arrogance is a turnoff, and having a big ego, although ego just means your sense of self, that's a conversation for later, but having a big ego or an inflated sense of self is unattractive. So it makes sense that that's something that people would want to avoid. But what we're not going to do is, in the name of not having a big ego or in the name of trying to be, in faux humility, then neglect ourselves and not take care of ourselves and then let people treat us like trash for the sake in relationships, for the sake of, of this false humility and this not being told you have a big ego, right? Okay, so I'm going to read the definition of ego. Your ego is your conscious mind, the part of your identity that you consider yourself. So it's who you, in my definition, it's also who you want people to see you as. So you have this idea of who you are and the kind of person you are. And most of the time, maybe your actions reflect that, and sometimes they don't. And when things happen that are in contrast with your ego, then we start to want to protect our ego. And that's where, pride comes in and things like that. It is also, but in the layman's definition, an ego is defined as an inflated feeling of pride in your superiority to others. And so that's really what we're talking about. I don't the actual definition of ego is never used, it's hardly used properly in colloquial conversation. So we're going to talk about the ego as an inflated sense of self, or inflated pride in your superiority to others. So what I explain to my clients, and I'm going to talk about this in terms of relationships and also health and fitness. What I explain to my clients is ego says, here's who I want you to think I am, and I will do anything and everything to make sure you believe that about me, even if that means I go home and act differently. Self-esteem says, here is my true self. And because I know that I have work to do, and because I value myself, I am working towards being the best version of myself, and that ain't got nothing to do with you. That is self-esteem. Self-esteem says, here I am, flaws and all, knowing that these are flaws and actively working to become a better person. And because I know that I'm actively working to become a better person, it has nothing to do with you. Ego says, I care about what you think, I care about what you believe. And so my job is to protect your version, your vision of who I am. And even if that means that I'm going to pretend to have this false bravado, and that I'm going to be prideful, because I don't want you to see who I really am. And self-esteem and ego are very different in those ways. Ego has a hard time acknowledging when it's wrong. Ego has a hard time acknowledging when it needs help, because that might break the version of yourself that you want people to see. And I'm speaking from experience. Y'all know I don't lie about that kind of stuff. I want to also be clear. There are certain areas of my life where I have an ego, and certain areas where I don't. Okay, I don't have an ego as it relates to YouTube. There's a lot for me to learn. I don't have an ego as it relates to fitness. There's a lot. I know that I don't know everything. I'm open and willing to, take feedback and criticism and all that stuff. I'm trying to think of an area of my life right now where I do have an ego. I gotta think about that. But I know I have it. I have an ego around certain things, but my self-esteem comes from knowing that I do have flaws and actively working towards them, and saying, I am okay if you see me for who I am. Ego says, do not. And I'm okay with you seeing who I am, because I'm actively working towards becoming a better person. And because I'm actively working towards that, I'm trying new things, I'm gaining confidence, and that therefore boosts my self-esteem. I was having a conversation with someone earlier about ego and confidence, and I was like, "Well, what do you think the difference is?" And he said, there's actually a fine line between ego and confidence. And if you have confidence, you actually have great self-esteem. People with big egos or inflated senses of self typically don't have great self-esteem, and I can vouch for this in myself. And also, this is like the person who's like, I don't need nothing from anybody else. I got it. But then they're like afraid to try new things, or they're afraid to overcome some adversities, and you see them making excuses for themselves. That's not self-esteem. Ego says, I'm going to tell you that I'm fine. I'm going to tell you that I've got all this confidence and power. But when it comes down to it, I'm not fighting back against anybody. I'm not going to overcome even my own mind to get where I need to go with my goals. Ego is very comfortable with where they're at, because potentially becoming better would mean they'd have to admit that they were wrong, right? Ego loves victimhood. Self-esteem says, I'm not a victim. I'm going to try. I'm going to keep working towards something. That is the difference to me between having an ego and self-esteem. Let me round this out for fitness. Ego says, I look good the way I am. I don't need, or, the women in my community are bigger than we are, so I'm good where I'm at. Ego says, I don't need to change because I'm comparing myself to everybody else. Self-esteem says, how can I be the best version of myself? Or ego says, well, I'm not as big as he is, or I'm not as big as she is, or I'm not doing what he or she is doing. Again, comparison to other people. Self-esteem says, how do I become the healthiest version of myself? What do I need to do to ensure that I live a long, healthy, fulfilling life so that I can help other people? You see the difference? Ego is very concerned, although ego will pretend that it does not care about what other people think. Ego will pretend, but ego is afraid to try. Ego is afraid to ask for help because, God forbid, you see that that I'm not as I have presented myself to be. I'm not as confident as I have pretended to be. And I think this is why we have all these celebrities who are afraid to lose weight, honestly, because they are afraid to acknowledge there's a part of them that has low self-esteem, and they're like, well, what if I lose weight, who am I? I have to acknowledge that maybe my false sense of confidence from being, body positive or whatever is not exactly what I claimed it was. So ego versus self-esteem. Self-esteem says, here I am, this is who I am, I acknowledge that I have flaws, and regardless of who's around, I'm working towards goals to be better for myself. And when women ask me questions about that as it relates to health and fitness, I'm like, what you're doing for your body ain't got nothing to do with anybody else. That has nothing to do with anybody else. That would be your ego. Your ego would be saying, hey, what do they think? What are they going? No, 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 no. My self-esteem says, hey, you are valued, and because I know my value, I'm going to work to protect my health. I'm going to have standards and boundaries for myself and how I exist in this world apart from what other people think. Okay. And a lot of us are acting, and myself included, I was one of those people who acted in response to the world, as in, and that was my ego speaking, right? My ego was like, okay, I'm going to do everything so that XYZ persons think this about me. And this can be subconscious too. And let me talk about this in health and fitness too. This will show up and this will manifest itself in, I'm afraid to say no to the food you just offered me because I don't want you to think I'm ungrateful. I'm afraid to suggest a healthier restaurant because I don't want you to think I've changed. Now that's your ego. That is not your self-esteem. And so when we talk about this fear of having a big ego once you start taking care of yourself, ironically, ironically, what you think is egotistical is actually you having self-esteem. It's, I care about my body, I care about my health, and so I'm making these decisions, and it has nothing to do with you. Because true self-esteem says, I don't, I'll be fine if you don't agree with the decisions I make. Ego says, I'm going to pretend like I'm fine with that you, I'm going to pretend like I'm fine with if you don't agree with the decisions I make, but deep down inside, my self-esteem is so low that I need you to agree with me. So therefore, I go and do the thing that I shouldn't be doing because I want you to validate me. And so it's really important that we distinguish between self-esteem and ego as it relates to health and fitness, but even in relationships, right? Having standards is not having an ego. Having standards means you have good self-esteem, because there's a lot of people who have big egos, but they will still choose partners, right? Let's say you have a big ego as it relates to your job. Let's say that you're someone who's like, I'm the baddest CEO on this block. I work on Wall Street, or I work for this banking company. I'm partner at this firm. You're like, nobody can tell me nothing about doing my job, but your self-esteem is low. So you choose men who do not reflect your value, right? So let's be clear here. You can have an ego in certain areas of your life and low self-esteem altogether. Because if you have generally good self-esteem, your ego, that part of your ego sort of diminishes in all areas of your life because now you're not looking to prove anything to anybody. And I'm saying this as someone who has had to work hard at that and to really develop my own sense of self. It's why I created the confidence course for women, because this is the in that course I talk about all of the things that I did to develop a healthy sense of self, to diminish my own ego while still maintaining standards. Because there's this idea that if you don't have a big ego, then you accept anything and everything. Not I, said the brown cow. Not I. I only accept what is at my standard. Because I know my value, I now have standards for how people will treat me, for what kind of food I eat, for what time I go to bed. I have standards for how I exercise because I value myself. And when you value yourself, not for other people, but for your intrinsic value, you tend to have better self esteem. And then you're not so concerned with the noise that comes with that. Now, one of my favorite phrases is that insecurities are loud and confidence is quiet. So when I think about when people say to me, well, I don't want to become arrogant, or I don't want to become obsessed, or I don't want to become, if I, I don't want to become one of those girls, right? In the fitness industry. Well, my thing is insecurities are loud and confidence is quiet. So if you're seeing people talking about their butt and their waist ratio and, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, then that likely they're actually insecure. Oh, true. Thank you, Jamila. It seems to me like there's a lot of the false self and living in the ego. It always feels shaky to me in my body and my voice. Yes, because I totally agree. When because you're pretending. And there's this like trembling. You guys have I think we've all come across someone. If you can read through people, I think we've all come across people when they're like acting out and you're like, that is there's a child in there who is scared, who is very, very scared. And so while they have this, again, I'll call it false bravado, they have this, this false pretension or this false confidence, you can see through that. And you're like, yeah, it's, you're trying to make people see something that is not there, And so that, as it relates to health and fitness, particularly when you see these women or men even who are constantly showing off their body, insecurities are loud, confidence is quiet. Now, there are people who are very confident and have self-esteem and still show off their bodies. And that's a determinant that you'll have to figure out on your own. But insecurities tend to be loud. The people who are making the most noise, the people who are talking about things the most, tend to be the ones who are more insecure. And I've been that girl. It's funny. Oh, I don't know if I should say this out loud. Okay, I'm gonna say it. So I coach athletes outside, and for the most part, I'm by myself. I'm the only coach out there, but there have been some coaches who have been showing up lately. And boy, it's funny. They are loud. They want everybody. One of my boys goes, Coach Joe, I think that coach wants everybody to know he's coaching. And I was like, you said something out from the mouths of babe. That and it's like the kids are watching me coach, and I'm of course having a conversation with them and instructing them, but there's not this loud like do this like, and they're seeing the difference and they're going, what's that about? And in their little brains, they have figured out, I need to be seen because I don't have enough confidence. And I've been there as that person, right? So all that talking loudly so that everybody hears is actually a cry from the ego, right? Insecurities are loud, confidence is quiet. So it's really important to be able to say, okay, when you're thinking about saying, okay, well, I don't want to be arrogant. I don't want to have a big ego. The key here is saying, am I doing this because I value myself, or am I doing this because I want other people to see this version of me and I'm afraid? One of the key differences when people have an ego, one of the key differences when people have an ego is that they're afraid to ask for help. They're afraid to try new things. Like fear of failure is it is a hallmark of having a big ego and inflated sense of self. Because if I have to present to you that I am perfect, then God forbid I fail, because I am perfect and I don't make mistakes and I don't admit when I'm wrong. So then I'm blaming and shaming other people for the things that I actually need to fix in my own life, right? Because God forbid I admit that I've made some mistakes and need to change. People with self esteem go, you messed up, girl. You messed up. Let's try again. I'm okay with that. I messed up. Maybe let me go ask for some help. Let me, go journal on this. Let me self reflect, right? That's a key hallmark of someone's self esteem. They're able to reflect. People with large egos are unable to pull up a mirror and go, am I the problem? That is a key. That is a key skill. It's part of emotional intelligence. People who tend to have high self-esteem have emotional intelligence. I was like, my dog's out here running around acting a fool. Okay. One thing that when I was researching and talking to people about this is that, oh my gosh, is that people who have egos are usually not competent. They're not as competent as they pretend to be in a topic. And I was like, ooh, I was like that hit me, because I'm like, is there an area of life in my life where I'm not competent and I'm pretending like I am, right? Versus someone who's like, I'm okay that I'm not perfect and I'm going to embrace my imperfections and work towards being a better person. That's the difference between having an ego versus having self-esteem. People with egos tend to not be as competent as they come off. And because they're afraid to be wrong, they don't seek help and they don't seek more information, because they can't handle if who they have shown you to be is marred somehow by having to admit that they're wrong or having to grow. So, with health and fitness, let's talk about being obsessed with yourself versus being obsessed with your health, because that's a large component of ego versus self esteem in fitness. Having a big ego around fitness is not only do I need to be perfectly lean and healthy and all that stuff, but I also need to stay this way so that other people like me, or so that XYZ feels this way about me. Okay, because my perception is the perception of me is more important than my actual thoughts about myself. I encourage my clients to be obsessed with their health, not obsessed with themselves. Because when you're obsessed with your health, you're doing it because you want to be the best version of yourself. And your health is all encompassing. It's your spiritual, physical, emotional, psychological, all of that encompassing. Versus obsessed with yourself generally has to do with your outward appearance. And if you guys know my story, you know that I've been 115 pounds and I've been 180 pounds, and I was happy at neither one of them, because being obsessed with your outward appearance never gets you anywhere. What it gets you is a big ego when you're finally lean and you got a six pack and everybody's complimenting you and you fitness size 0. And then you go home at night because you still hate yourself, your inner self, because your body will never give you the confidence that you think it's going to give you. Your confidence comes from knowing your abilities and trying new things and accepting who you are. Okay, so I encourage my clients to be obsessed with their health, not obsessed with themselves. And that is how we differentiate between having an ego in fitness and being like, oh, I'm all that in a bag of chips, versus I'm developing my self-esteem through this very challenging process of facing my demons as I'm trying to lose weight, facing, some trauma as I'm trying to lose weight, and changing my lifestyle for the better. Okay. And when you are obsessed with your health, you are going to naturally develop boundaries and expectations. And I think one thing that scares people is their ego will say, but what if you lose friends? But what if your husband thinks this? But what if your family thinks that? And it's like, literally, I'm just going to say this right now. Nobody cares about your health but you, and no one's going to be on your deathbed when you're dying from diabetes. Your ego is protecting you because the fear that comes along with changing your life, and this is not just health and fitness, this is anything. When I decided that I was going to start doing inner work, change my entire lifestyle, and by that I mean I'm not going to be sitting around just negatively wallowing with you people. I'm going to focus on personal development. I'm going to think positively. I'm going to listen to different music. My ego said, but what if you lose all your friends? Right? What if you lose all your friends? And my self esteem said, are you going to be the best physical, spiritual, emotionally intelligent version of yourself? Then let's do this. But when it comes to health and fitness, a lot of people are actually afraid subconsciously of their world crashing because what they've known and what people know them as is going to change. And that's part of our ego. Is our egos are their job is to protect. I tell you guys on my you guys know I coach athletes, and I talk to my athletes about this all the time because my athletes are high level athletes. And one of the things I have to do is help them to challenge their egos, because when they're trying a drill that they're about to fail at, they want to quit because it's that part of them is like, wait a minute, I would rather not try because failure is hard. My ego can't handle failure. And I will talk to my 11-year-olds about this. And then we do the thing until they succeed, because that is a skill that they need to develop. And that's a skill I wish I was taught, in that through that lens as a child, that your brain's job is to protect you. And that even means protecting you from feeling stupid. Um, yes, Esther's secret. That means it's a sign. That means that it's time. Whatever it is, it's time. I love that. I love that. Oh, I lost my place in my notes. Hold on one second. So sometimes we conflate having standards, boundaries, and expectations with having an ego, and people will inflate that. I was listening to some YouTube conversation and they were like, these women nowadays have an ego. And I'm like, do they? Or do they now have standards, boundaries, and expectations that you didn't want them to have? And it gets conflated because, often when people start to raise their standards for their life, other people are offended, and that naturally excludes people, and people don't like to be excluded. So they feel like, oh, she thinks highly of herself. And I will say this, I have been that person on the other end of that, where, I've had friends who have, changed their lives, leveled up. And I'm like, oh, they think they're better than me. And then now I see from in hindsight's 2020, I'm like, no, I just didn't fit that world because of who I was at the time. And so when we sometimes conflate, oh, if someone has standards, boundaries, and expectations for themselves and others, they're arrogant. They have a confidence issue, and that prevents a lot of us from doing a lot of things in our life that we should be doing. And this particularly relates to health and fitness, you guys, because my there's a fear of people falling out of your life. There's a fear of people not being able to come with you. And because we're afraid of people not being able to come with us, then we stay where we shouldn't be. We stay at a lower level. And this, you guys, this this relates to relationships too. And I'll be the first one to say, I have I had a lot of low self-esteem. And as such, I would choose men who did not actually match my true value. Right? It's like, oh, I want people to believe that I'm this kind of person. And it's so interesting. Okay, this just came to me. It's so interesting that your mate selection says more about your self-esteem than your job or your or whatever, your achievements. Because there are these people who are like these high-powered boss babes, killing it, making hundreds of thousands of dollars. They've got multiple businesses, and then they choose someone who doesn't support them. And it's like, because their self-esteem is not there in that area, right? They have high self-esteem when it comes to work. They have a big ego when it comes to work necessarily. And then when it comes to people, it's like, ooh. And so I start to look at myself and ask myself, okay, who am I surrounding myself with? What places am I allowing myself to go to? Because that reflects what I think about myself. How do I treat myself? Because I'm that person. I have a big ego when it comes to how people perceive me in my job. 10,000%. I'm not afraid to admit it, you guys. I want to be seen as a consummate professional, period. But how's my self-esteem? Two different things. Two different things. So I want to challenge you to develop your self-esteem, and that will actually spill over into other areas of your life. And I was actually just having a conversation with someone on the phone today about having my self-esteem is actually growing, and building my own self-esteem and confidence has actually helped my business because I started to charge more. Because even though I was like, I'm a consummate professional and I do things, my self-esteem said I'm not. So therefore charge XYZ, undervaluing myself, right? And so I want to encourage you to develop your self-esteem by having standards, boundaries, and expectations for yourself. And understand that boundaries are not designed to keep people out. Boundaries are designed to for you to keep yourself safe and sane, so that when it's time, you can also interact with the world. And yes, people are going to conflate those with having an ego. Yes, people are going to conflate that with you being arrogant. Okay? Arrogance says, I don't care if they like me. Confidence says, I'll be fine if they don't. That's another ism that you hear on the internet, right? Arrogance is actually ego. Arrogance is, I need to protect myself so much from any shame or guilt that I need to portray this image for you. Confidence says, this is who I am. I'm working on myself. I know my value despite my flaws. And my value has nothing to do with whether you like me or not. Versus, I think I'm better than you because my value is dependent on whether or not I'm better than you. And then I have to do everything in my power to show that I'm better than you. And that ends up showing itself as being arrogant, right? All right, so what do we do with this information? How do I deal with it? If you are interested in learning more about how my confidence journey and how I began to develop self-esteem and develop a true sense of confidence outside of people, places, relationships, and things, you can grab my confidence course, which is 10 Secret Keys to Confidence. And I will pop that in the chat. It's got 10 modules plus some bonus modules for my clients, and I'll be adding to that as well as I continue to grow as a person. So I'll go ahead and copy that link and put it in the chat below. If you're someone who is interested in health and fitness coaching, I do offer virtual coaching to clients, and I will go ahead and post that right there. And I also have a fitness course that's happening right now that will be available to everyone once it's complete. So what do you do with this? I'll give you one of the tips from my confidence course. One of the things that I think is very valuable for women in order to build their self-esteem and to build their confidence, and which will inherently shrink your ego, is to start to try new things, try hard things, challenge yourself to do something different. If your weight or your health has been an issue, start there. Because typically when people start to change their health, their whole life changes. What I've noticed is when there's a weight problem, it's actually other things manifested in their bodies. And so when they start to focus on their health, walking 45 minutes a day, eating fruits and vegetables, drinking their water, other things start to come up, and they start to realize things about themselves. They start to gain this new perspective on themselves, and they begin to change from the inside out. And I am all about inner work, like inner change, not this topical stuff. So I would say if you are looking to start to increase your confidence, do something hard, do something challenging. And it doesn't have to be physically challenging. It could be mentally or emotionally challenging. A lot of my clients, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, they in these relationships with these men who are like, oh baby, I want you to have some Jack in the Box. Baby, let me make you this. I'm like, I don't tell them what to do, but I go, you deserve someone who's going to support you in your goals. That's a hard decision you got to make though, right? Or decide to go to the gym without them. Decide that, you know what? I'm going to say no to you. What will he think if I say no? There's your ego, right? Start doing challenging things, emotionally, physically, spiritually, intellectually challenging things, and your self-esteem and confidence will grow. And how do you avoid being arrogant and having an ego? You make sure that the way that what you're doing has nothing to do with anybody else. I'm not acting so that you like me. I'm not doing this because I want to be better than someone else. I say this all the time. I'm not in competition with no woman because I'm in competition with myself. And I'm sorry, but I can't run 2 races at once. I was a hurdler and I was a sprinter, and I do 1 race at a time. And every single time it's against me. Every single time. I'm competing against me. So therefore, and just like I tell my athletes, I have blinders on. I can't see what y'all are doing over there in lanes 1 through 8 because I'm in lane 5 with myself. That's how you avoid being confident, being arrogant, and having an ego. It's me versus me. Me versus me, not me versus anybody else. I'm not comparing myself to anybody else. Me versus me. And it will sound selfish. It will sound selfish at first, but it is possible to take care of yourself and that to spill over in other people's lives. It's very, very possible. But you have to start with yourself. You have to take care of yourself. All right, you guys, that is it for today's video. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to grab some dinner. I am having for dinner, I'm debating whether I want to have salmon or steak, or a steak salad, because I love steak salad with like cranberries and almonds and what else? Oh, I put sun-dried tomatoes on there, and then I have this really creamy ranch dressing that I like. So anyway, I'm gonna go figure out what I want for dinner and feed my dog. And thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm so glad this resonated with you guys, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week. And I'll see y'all in the next one. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Bye.